Well, while we're in X Factor mode, ladies and gentlemen, if I was bigging up the next contributor, I would say here's a man who's founded his own architectural practice. He's a visiting professor. He's on the RIBA validation panels. He's an external examiner. Please welcome the Director of DRDH, Mr. David Howarth.
As Paul said, I'm co-founder director of DRDH Architects and also visiting professor of architecture at Northumbria in Newcastle. I also sit on the RIBA Education Committee. I'm conscious that much of the debate today has and will be concentrated on the dialogue and synergies between education and the profession and where that line is drawn of the gateway to the profession. I don't have answers in the short presentation, just a few thoughts on the subject based on my experience working across both. However, I do welcome the potential flexibility that the motions offer, and I'm certainly excited about the potential for the future. The London-based practice I founded with Daniel Rosbottom in 2000 situates its projects within a wider academic context, including teaching and research. Daniel's head of school at Kingston University, and we have taught postgraduate design studio for a number of years. Two of our architects from first year and undergraduate studios, and one of our senior architects involved in advocacy teaching and delivery of professional studies at London Met's Cass School. We know that for some involved in practice and teaching, the academic studio is viewed as a place of retreat, perhaps from the drudgery of much of what is inherent in daily professional life. Our attitude to practice, however, has emerged into a resonant space born out of the oscillation between these two. And I can say with certainty that we have learnt what our practice is, I think, through the act of teaching. Our continued ambition as both a practice and within teaching is to approach architecture and the design of physical environments as a form of praxis, a symbiotic and critical dialogue that encompasses and entwines academia and the work of our firm. Schools have always tapped into the resource of the smaller teacher practitioner to help deliver design teaching, but we are interested in the model of critical teaching practice, much more common in Europe through valued practice professorships and supported research. And it's an emerging position for a number of practices working within schools of architecture in the UK today, and shouldn't be forgotten. In the public forum, however, the gulf between practice and education often seems sort of unbridgeable. If we believe press editorial following the release of the recent RIBA skills survey, one would conclude that outside our world, there is an unbridgeable gulf between what is taught in schools of architecture and what is needed by the profession. Even though, interestingly, BD did remind us in comments a few days later that 25% of practices surveyed are not actually recently employed graduates, but still felt qualified to return an opinion. Much is often spoken of inappropriate skills, technical deficiencies and usefulness, as if learning ended on graduation and the conditions pre- and post-qualification were somehow mutually exclusive. This perceived divide is perhaps a natural state between academia and the profession, and one which has been with us since the image of architecture perhaps took over its making at the very foundation of formal architectural teaching. The first school of architecture, as you might understand it, was the École Polytechnique in Paris, established in 1794, shortly after the French Revolution. Within the school, it was images of architecture, drawings of Boulet's cenotaph and Newton, for example, which became central to architectural discourse. And somewhat perversely, within a new republic, a hierarchy was established in which the conceiver of ideas was privileged over those who merely brought them into physicality. Of course, the relationship between the constructed building and its preceding representations and theoretical groundings has always been central to the making of architecture, as Pérez Gómez reminds us. And it's the processes required in the making of buildings which inevitably become architecture itself within the academic context. And the suspicion of practice is perhaps born from a frustration over their continued abstraction and the distance they can become from the act of making and experience. For us, however, architecture, its teaching and its practice is not about abstraction, rather it's of matter. In Heidegger tells us that living amongst things is a basic principle of human existence. And as practitioners, we understand this innately. We know it in the process of watching a building emerge under the hands of a craftsman, in the moment when we enter a space we intimately understand from a drawing, and in the feeling when, as we run our fingers along the surface, it becomes defined through the touch of a material, rather than through the lines with which once demarcated its edges. Of course, professional experience reduces the space of perception between this abstraction of the drawing and the actual, but for students, the experience of their own architecture is almost by necessity mediated. The distance between their knowledge of the works of others and the lines on the paper or the screen can appear insurmountable. Indeed, any potential relationship between the two often remains entirely unrecognised until they have the opportunity to build within practice. In his essay, Teaching Architecture, Learning Architecture, Peter Zumter suggests that the first thing a student needs to have explained to them is that the person standing in front of them is not someone who asks questions whose answers he already knows. The emergence of architecture in its physical form and its transference from an intellectual pursuit to the production of an artefact, building, appears a largely inexplicable process, one that fundamentally perhaps cannot be easily taught, only learned. In this light, we see both teaching and practice as an ongoing dialogue and a continued learning process, both for ourselves and for our students. And it's one in which we understand practice as both noun and verb. What interests me within the context of today's forum is the intersection between these two understandings of the subject and the opportunities inherent in the space to continue to enrich architectural education. As practice broadens, specialises or morphs in response to new ways of working, and academic institutions strive for individuality or specificity, our gaze is continually drawn back to the centre, the intersection, the common ground. I'm not suggesting practice outside this intersection is not able to produce architectural value, or that the specialist interests orbiting architectural education have no place in the profession, but it is this potential growth and expansion within this space which has resonance to the current debate. Perhaps the roll call of our RIBA gold medalists over the last 10 years suggests potential inhabitants of this space, many of which have influenced architectural education as much as practice, whether involved directly in education or working with strong pedagogic working practices outside of it. I should also cite the 2015 Annie Spink Award winner Florian Bagel of Aru and the 2015 Jane Drew Prize winners Grafton in this company. Our own approach as practitioners mirrors our methods within the academic studio and has formed the foundation for the design and delivery of our first major international project, £120 million cultural project recently completed for 2 buildings in Norway, 100 kilometres in the Arctic Circle. I don't have time to discuss the project at length, but it's been interesting to reflect on professional thresholds, even this morning, and matters of learning. When we won the project in 2009, having been successful in 2 competitions, we were confronted with a very unfamiliar context, both physically, programmatically, and professionally. 2 flights away, an unknown language, no knowledge of Norwegian standards or regulations, and BIM until then held at a healthy distance. In fact, none of our team had any experience designing or procuring a project of this scale anywhere. We fought for the right to build the project and ran the design team from our London office, oscillating between a rigorous pedagogic approach to design development and relearning the practical aspects of professional life. It's enabled our young team to experience the design and development of a project from competition drawing to completion. For us, we have grown as architects and we hope as teachers. The academic pursuits of research making, testing, observing, questioning allowed us to successfully deliver one of the most complex of building types an architect can perhaps be called upon to produce. 1,000-seat symphonic hall, fully adaptable for theatre, dance and opera, procured with an alien contractual framework, on time, on budget, and to local, national, international acclaim. When the project was started, were we appropriately skilled? Probably not. But thinking as architects, the way our students are taught to think, and learning as they are guided to learn, we were able to navigate the complexity of the project to produce a coherent, fully coordinated, and critically received work of architecture. For us, the threshold between being a student and architect is in continual flux, and both the profession and the academy should keep this in mind. I'd like to finish with a sentiment expressed by John Toomey, partner of last year's gold medal winners, O'Donnell and Toomey, when he suggests that architecture cannot be an art in the pure sense. It is inextricably caught up in mundane affairs. And that seems like a good place to end. Thank you.
It sort of seems like lowering the tone to say we're now going to debate a 300 credit programme compliant with the requirements of the Bologna Agreement, or spaghetti bolognese as I think of it as, of course. But that's what we are going to do, but I hope inspired by that lovely talk. And first up to discuss this motion from the University of Bath, Dyfed Griffiths. Please welcome him.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we three have a short straw here to continue to inspire. I was asked to speak to this proposal largely from the standpoint of the European context, in which I have particular experience, but I think it's important to enshrine what we are thinking about in this debate today in the realities of how academic endeavour is being judged. The Bologna process emerged from the Bologna Declaration of 1999 and is concerned solely with the promotion of transparency and portability of academic qualifications, and through this to make possible the mobility of students between institutions in European member states. And out of this emerged the European Directive, which currently governs the structure of our academic programs. The process does not of itself aim to harmonise at all any national education systems, but rather to establish a common framework within which the diverse characteristics of the respective educational systems and their academic programmes can be preserved and to facilitate transparency. In pursuit of this objective, it has implemented particular tools, notably the European Credit Transfer and Accumulation System, known as ECTS, as the measure by which the structure of the respective academic programmes offered by the member states may be understood. Through compliance with attributes that are common to the particular academic endeavour, the process enables the mutual recognition of academic qualifications and allows degree programmes and academic qualifications awarded in one country to be understood by another, and thereby enables mobility of graduates between a first cycle programme in one member state and a second cycle programme in another. For architecture, the mutual recognition and transparency of academic qualifications is afforded through the compliance with Article 46 of the European Directive, known as the Architects Directive, that defines specific criteria with which all academic programmes devoted to architectural training are required to comply. And these are significant. There are four. Firstly, that the training shall be of a minimum duration of 4 years of full-time academic study at a university or comparable institution and must lead to the successful completion of a university degree or diploma award. Secondly, that the training programme must demonstrate and confirm that it is concerned with architecture as the principal subject of study. Thirdly, that the training programme must demonstrate a balance between the theoretical and practical aspects of training. And finally, it must guarantee at the completion of the programme the acquisition by the graduate of the knowledge and skills defined within the 11 points of the directive, which in fact are the criteria for validation at Part 1 and Part 2 held in common by the RIBA and the ARB. A brief word on the European Credit Transfer System. It is based upon workload, and workload is directly related to time that students typically need. It is not an indicator of rigour or of any standard of achievement. Nonetheless, the commonly accepted structure of academic programmes in architecture is one that offers a minimum total of 300 ECTS across the first and second cycles of academic study. But this is by no means the fixed structure of all programmes and represents only the minimum standard of academic training in terms of its duration and credit value. There are already variants to this, where training programmes in excess of 300 credits already apply to certain UK programmes, and in Europe, academic programmes are not confined by any means to this academic minimum. For example, the 6 Dutch Academies of Architecture offer a 4-year bachelor programme followed by a 4-year master's programme, within which 2 years of embedded practice are incorporated as an integral component of study. The University in Vienna has recently introduced a new 3-year master program, of itself 180 ECTSs, that is open to first-cycle graduates in architecture across the European states. These examples are representative of a shift that is emerging in the structure and rigour of training programs offered by institutions in Europe generally. In practice, however, the credit system is neither universally nor consistently applied by corresponding institutions across the member states in respect of those units and are accepted as core contributors to the training programme in architecture, nor is it always properly understood. And hence, there are significant discrepancies between academic programmes amongst the MSs in the respective weighting of the credits awarded to common core components of academic study, the most significant of which is exemplified within the studio design project with which we are all familiar. This can vary in weighting across different MSs, member states rather, from a value of 3 ECTSs to 30 ECTSs as a statement of achievement in the final design thesis at master's level. Such an apparent devaluation of a core study unit betrays the lack of rigour evident within some academic programmes in architecture and furthermore significantly distorts the balance between the theoretical and practical aspects of training that institutions are required to demonstrate. The ECTS system, therefore, as it currently stands, is in consequence not the measure by which the rigour of an academic programme should in any way be assessed. In the United Kingdom, the defining characteristic of our programmes is that they significantly establish the studio design project as the prominent component of the curriculum. It represents over 50% of the academic programme in each academic year. No other academic programme in Europe offers any similar comparison, nor do they necessarily establish the studio design project as we do as the principal conduit through which the attendant components of tectonic, materiality and so on, environmental design, are interrogated and assessed. And this is the unique characteristic and strength of the UK academic programme. Nonetheless, to the extent that academic programmes emerging within certain European states are beginning to evolve new and more robust directions in pedagogy, which include the recognition of the significance of embedded practice experience towards the rigour and integrity of the academic programme, there is clear evidence of an increasing trend in the member states and their academic institutions towards a revision of the standards of their academic training programmes to a higher level. The commonly accepted 300 ECTS 2-cycle programme study over 5 years therefore emerges as the minimum standard of academic training, which in response to the challenge that certain emerging programmes in Holland and Austria in particular are making, as well as emerging new private schools of architecture in Europe, make it necessary that we are steadfast in our endeavour for the achievement of the highest standards of architectural academic training in the UK, measured not solely by an adherence to European academic paradigms, but shaped by other protocols that define the qualification, the future of the profession in this country, and the standing of UK architectural education within the European and the international arenas. And finally, undergraduate architecture education must continue to adapt to meet the changing role of the architect in contemporary society. Central to this is the recommendation for revised curricula informed by a more contemporary educational theory aimed at curiosity-driven, self-directed learning and critical opinion of evidence. We must advocate a learning environment that encourages collaboration over competition, connections between theory and practical experience, and the willingness to choose what to learn and to self-assess what has been learned. The Bologna Accord and the European Directive are but 2 frameworks within which the current discourse on architectural education within Europe may be considered. They are not, however, appropriate to the wider issues of the international arena that remain to be assessed and which may yet challenge the basis upon which the nature and characteristics of the architectural training programmes continues to be evaluated. The objective of academic training programmes within UK institutions is towards the aspiration for entry to the profession, for the practice of architecture. It demands the corresponding contribution of situated learning to the community of practice, of the application of theory in practice, of participation within it, and the understanding of it. And it is towards these objectives that all academic training programmes must be singularly directed. Thank you.
We have 2 more international speakers. First up, Wolfgang Haack of the Architects' Council of Europe. Welcome. Thank you.
You want to encourage me. Thank you very much. Something to my person. I'm freelance architect specialized in court expertise for fees, architect's fees. It gives a good income. And the other is building costs. I'm here as vice president of the ACE, and I was for a long time at the board as a normal board member, and with my colleague from Ireland, I advocated the PQD, so please leave your tomatoes in your pockets. And again, we are in a procedure to bargain with the Americans, TTIP, and with the Canadians, CETA. And this is a side remark. They always accuse us of our low standards. And I must remind you that also Germany increased the studies for 63 schools out of 66 from 4 to 5 years or even more. So this is a challenge for you. I know you have the fee question. So I'm also co-founder of the ENACA. ENACA is the European Network of Architects Competent Authorities, where the ARP is member. And I'm member of the, like David, of the EU-COM subgroup on notifications of architectural diplomas. So this is my background. I brought with me 3 hypotheses. Perhaps you will like them, perhaps you will not like them. First, the ECTS system is less transparent than we all think. Despite the same root, credit and credibility can be opposites, leading to substantial imponderables as regards notifications. A credit point equals a workload of 25 to 30 hours, a difference of 20%. Consequently, a 4-year study course with 30 hours per credit point results in 7,200 hours. A 5-year course with 25 hours per credit point equals 7,500. So the difference is very small. The workload covers examinations, lectures, seminars, home study time, and is defined by each university individually. The EU-COM decided not to follow the ACE's proposal to replace the criterion years by ECTS in Article 46 of the Professional Qualifications Directive. As a result, the text of Article 46 is as follows, I quote, quotation was already made, but I have a slightly different quotation. Training as an architect shall comprise a total of at least 5 years of full-time or not less than 4 years of full-time study accompanied by a certificate attesting to the completion of 2 years of professional traineeship. But the number of years of academic study referred to in paragraphs 1 and 2 may, in addition, be expressed with the equivalent ECTS credits. The EU-COM's decision to rely on credit points only as substitutes, based among other factors on the apprehension of credit points being not altogether precise. Second, the lack of transparency is an obstacle to the desired mobility of students and graduates. Some figures of Germany 2013 illustrate this. International diplomas. 69% of the subjects of international diploma submitted in Germany were recognized. 21% were recognized in part, and 10% were altogether rejected. National diplomas. 68%, nearly the same amount, of the subjects of national diploma submitted to other German universities were recognized, and 32% were questioned. By now, 47 countries have signed the Bologna Accord to enhance student mobility. However, since 2009, there has been no increase in the mobility of German students and graduates to foreign countries. Third, the freedom of the architectural schools is restricted by the EU notification system. even though Bologna promised something else. The 11 points of Article 46, Para 2, Professional Qualifications Directive, prescribe contents and structure of architectural study courses. So architectural schools must deliberately decide whether or not they offer their students a diploma which can be notified to grant automatic recognition. And I know a lot of study courses which can't be granted automatic recognition. My conclusion, my personal conclusion for having seen Bologna for a long time, Bologna process killed the universities and reinvented the schools. Well-framed study courses and no freedom for or liberty for the students. So this is a point I think everybody should pay attention on, that if you transpose this, you transpose this in a good way and not in an unflexible way. The victims will be the students. Thank you.
Last up, from Griffiths College, Dublin, please welcome Selma Harrington.
Thank you very much. I suppose what makes me also international is the fact that perhaps I'm an example of mobility of an architect born and bred in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I have escaped the war, being fortunate enough to get work in Zimbabwe, where I met my Irish husband who brought me to Ireland, where I knocked on the doors of the Royal Institute of Irish Architects, and a few years later became, through their nomination, elected president of Architects' Council of Europe, where I worked with Wolfgang for about 4 years. So I had to sort of quickly apply the problem-solving skills that our training equips us for, and to sort of apply the transferability of skills from practicing into advocacy and understanding of a lot of these regulatory issues. So what I'm working as now in a part-time capacity is in third-level education, leading a course, master's course in interior architecture, and also I'm involved in research at a PhD level. So hopping across many architectural disciplines, it's very close to my heart, the position of our profession, and I had a privilege through the previous roles to make a number of these elevator pitches about our profession. So I believe in flexibility. I believe in systems that allow us in European context and internationally to sort of be able to hop across and demonstrate the value of our profession and the role of our profession. So I'm offering just a couple of reflections on that from the European perspective that I had insight in, and from a perspective of a learner with whom I am engaged in with my current work, student. So I think flexibility, if we think about European goals, which are primarily jobs and growth and mobility, harmonization is sort of somewhere a method perhaps in some areas. If we think from that bigger picture, Bologna offers flexibility for students, for learners. It offers them, and through a number of initiatives like Erasmus, it offers them opportunity to go somewhere else and not only get the basic training, but also to be exposed to intercultural learning, which is very valuable. All for educators and for administrators of that mobility, of course, it is a complication, because in admissions, in assessment, and so on, it calls for more work, and it calls for kind of thorough monitoring of maintenance of quality standards. Therefore, it requires from us, educators or practitioners who might be involved in that process, constant re-education as well, because from where we started, it's far from what it is what is currently required. That puts emphasis of the importance of professional networking and engagement at the level of organizations like Architects Council of Europe or Union of International Architects, who have had their say and who maintain their aspirations on what the education should be of an architect. And of course of licensing body like ENACA that Wolfgang has mentioned. I think previous speakers have already touched on this sort of multiplicity or variations of model, which matches to a certain extent Bologna with its 3+2 basis, bachelor and masters, and then we have PPE add-on. So the model of 5+2 leading to licensing is what all international professional bodies like ACE and UIA advocate, and we remain to do so. There are, if we look at 300 credits, what does it mean? It's a mathematics, it's a method of sort of breaking down that road of 5 into 60 credits per year, and it allows schools to tailor courses and monitor the delivery of courses through that. For learner, the credit system offers a possibility perhaps to side skill and upskill their basic competencies. And so that can be an advantage and disadvantage, and we have to monitor that. The disadvantage could be perhaps a lack of consensus among architectural profession. What does it mean to be interior architects, and where is their place in this educational process, or landscape architect or urban designer, and so on. So again, going back to the role of professional bodies, that is something that the professional bodies can discuss and sort of articulate to help the education processes to continue. The challenges in that is also over-prescribing, being over sort of stifling creativity of both learners and educators in trying to be too precise in that. The dangers are also in over-fragmenting the whole process of education and reducing it only to a point-counting exercise. And of course managing the expectations both of learners and of practitioners who might be recipients of these learners in the end. However, I am quite optimistic about this European proposition. I think it forces the educators to constantly review their own education, to refresh it. It is also probably it is calling for a review of the mechanisms like Erasmus, a review of process of mobility of students that has already taken place in Europe for a number of years, and probably learning from that. So I again cannot emphasize enough how I believe that this type of discussions that we have heard this morning should also continue and should be linking into the discussions at the European level and the international level at the Architects Council and Union of International Architects. Thank you.